The box found beneath the scorched tree didn't just hold old papers. It held a truth buried for over 2 decades. In the States, summer of 2002, Dr. Aaliyah Greene, an African-American biologist specializing in the wetlands of Pine Bluff, Arkansas, vanished during a solo field expedition. His body was never found. All that remained was his motorboat, moored quietly at the edge of the swamp in a basalt, rain-soaked note with smeared handwriting. With no solid evidence, the case was quietly shelved, fading into rumor and silence within the local community. This is one of those haunting stories you'll only hear on Hidden Echoes, where we bring to light forgotten disappearances and the unsolved, secrets that linger at the blurred edge between truth and silence. Aaliyah Greene was used to the silence of night. On her late patrol shifts near the edge of the Pine Bluff wetlands in Arkansas, she often drove along rugged trails, the only sounds being the steady whir of insects and the distant hoot of owls. This was a place most people only remembered when something bad happened, a brush fire, a disappearance, or worse. But for Aaliyah, it was more than a patrol route. It was memory. It was unfinished. Because it was here that her beloved father vanished, and no one ever truly explained why. As a black female officer in a small southern town, Aaliyah knew what it meant to walk between 2 worlds, the badge she wore as a protector of the law and the silent code of a community long taught not to speak too loudly when things didn't make sense. Her father, Dr. Aaliyah Greene, was more than a dedicated biologist. He was a gentle man who once told her, "Curiosity isn't dangerous unless someone else sees it as a threat." The last time she saw him was the summer of 2002, when he promised to return after a 3-day solo expedition, but he never came back. Through childhood and into adulthood, Aaliyah lived surrounded by absence. Her mother, strong but worn from years of waiting, passed away from heart failure when Aaliyah was just 18. She carried on, self-reliant, choosing law enforcement not to punish, but to uncover what had been forgotten, like her father. That night, everything seemed routine until her radio crackled. "Unit 21, we've got a small fire signal near the southern forest edge. Could be unauthorized campers." "Aaliyah." "Confirmed. Unit 21 en route." She turned off the main patrol path, steering down a muddy road veined with roots. Her headlights cut through the low fog, lighting up trees that seemed to lean in, watching her pass. Something stirred in her. Not quite instinct, but a vague familiarity, like stepping back into the footprints of a forgotten childhood. No one believed her, but Aaliyah held on to one quiet belief that someday the forest would give her something back. Not a body, but the truth. And tonight, destiny felt close. The forest, where the fire had flared, was off limits for years, not because of local ghost stories, but because of underground heat pockets left over from a major fire in 2007. It was also the last recorded location of Dr. Aaliyah Greene before he disappeared. Aaliyah knew that too well. But tonight felt different. The air was thick, heavy, and as she crossed into the old reserve line, her radio began to crackle with static. She killed the engine, stepped out, flashlight and radio in hand. Mist hovered just above the ground. She moved slowly, her boots sinking into damp soil between roots and ash. Her heartbeat was the only sound she could trust. As she reached the center of the scorched area, there was no sign of campers, just the scent of something burned lingering on the wind. Then she saw it. A charred tree stump, once towering over the scorched woods, now collapsed in on itself, roots exposed like open hands. A patch of dirt beneath it had eroded, revealing something metallic, silver gray, and dented. Aaliyah knelt, brushing ash away with trembling fingers. Not from fear, but from something deeper. Something known. The box was heavier than expected, welded shut but corroded at the seams. Time and rain had left narrow gaps. She pulled out her knife and carefully pried it open. The metal groaned softly as the lid gave way. Inside, a weathered red-brown notebook, unsolved, stack of faded Polaroids, and a cracked plastic ID tag. Aaliyah Greene, research ID, 0241, Pine Bluff Ecological Survey. Aaliyah didn't speak. She sat in silence as the wind rustled. Through the trees, ash spiraling like a silent omen. The Polaroids revealed grainy images of fields, equipment, small teams, and one clear photo of a smiling man with curly hair and a close beard holding a strange plant sample, her father. Almost unconsciously, she whispered, "It's me, Daddy. It's your girl." Back home, Aaliyah didn't sleep. Her small apartment was filled with pieces of the past. A photo of her father leading a seminar on native flora, a map of Pine Bluff, forest marked with red ink, scattered notes, in her own handwriting. That night, she sat at her desk and opened the notebook from the box. The handwriting was unmistakable, his slanted, steady script. Each line was filled with excitement, charting his discovery of a previously undocumented plant species, one that could regenerate moisture and purify air naturally, potentially revolutionizing the way humanity viewed swamp ecosystems. The more she read, the closer she felt to him. A man who had once seemed like a vanished wound now felt alive in every word. He wrote about feeling watched, about fears that his research could be stolen, or worse, buried. In one final entry, he mentioned hiding a duplicate set of materials and samples in case the worst happens. Aaliyah laid the notebook down and leaned back, her mind a swirl of rage, sorrow, love, and resolve. She knew there had been something wrong about how quickly her father's disappearance had been written off. Too neat, too quiet. As a cop, she was trained to follow evidence. But now, her heart was also a tool, and it was telling her this box wasn't the only thing her father had left behind. She opened her laptop and began digging into records of private biological firms operating in the area in the early 2000s. The list was long, but one name stopped her cold: Genterra Bioresearch, a company that had partnered with local universities, then abruptly ceased all activity in 2003, the same year her father vanished. Aaliyah printed every document she could find, marking names, dates, and locations. She didn't know exactly what she was stepping into, but for the first time in 20 years, Aaliyah Greene felt she wasn't alone in her search for the truth. She had relit a fire, not just for her father, but for everyone who had ever been forced into silence. The metal box in Aaliyah's hands was colder than she expected. Though the lid was charred and warped, the body remained solid, as if someone had deliberately chosen a material meant to outlast time or curiosity. She knelt beside the burnt tree stump, surrounded by ash, char, and the lingering scent of smoke. She didn't rush to open it. Instead, she scanned the clearing one more time, the cop in her alert to any trace that someone else might have returned here. But tonight, the forest was silent. No footsteps, no distant lights, just her and the insects. She switched on her flashlight, aimed it at the lid, and gently pried it open. The dry, metallic screech echoed through the trees, making her flinch. A faint, musty smell rose from inside. Not unpleasant, but the scent of old books, of time sealed away. Inside was a worn leather notebook, the corners mottled with mildew, but intact. Beneath it, a small plastic bag held a few faded Polaroid photos and an old discolored ID tag. Aaliyah Greene, research ID number 241. Aaliyah touched it, a surge of grief and warmth rushing through her. After 20 years, this was the closest she'd come to holding a piece of her father. She opened the notebook. The first pages were careful scientific notes, tiny, deliberate handwriting filled with diagrams of plant structures and detailed annotations. But by the third page, the writing shifted, hurried, slanted, darker. One sentence was underlined: this species must not be commercialized. The ecological impact must be studied thoroughly before release. At the bottom of the page, in a shakier hand, I don't trust anyone anymore. Someone's been back at the station. Aaliyah turned the page just as she heard a soft rustle in the leaves. She instinctively shut off the flashlight, holding her breath. Silence. Then nothing. Maybe it was just wind or wildlife. But from that moment, she knew she wasn't just uncovering evidence. She was now a part of the story. Back at her vehicle, Aaliyah locked the doors and started the engine. But she didn't leave right away. Instead, she parked at a small clearing about 300 meters from the site, a spot where she could watch the trail leading into the restricted zone without being seen. Her eyes locked on the rearview mirror, notebook resting on her lap. But no one came. She drove home near 4 a.m. The next morning, with dawn breaking through the fog, Aaliyah brewed coffee and sat at her desk. The notebook was now sealed in a specimen-safe bag. She photographed each page with care, methodically, like processing evidence. Part of her wanted to report it immediately, but another part, the part still mourning, said, wait. This wasn't just the 2002 disappearance. This was her father. Within the research journal, Elijah began documenting what he believed were signs of being watched. Once, he saw an unfamiliar boat anchored near the station, gone by the time he returned. Another time, his rare plant samples were rearranged, even though the station had been locked. One scrawled entry, clearly written in distress, read, I don't believe it's an accident anymore. Something is happening in these woods, and I think someone wants me gone. Aaliyah paused at that sentence. Her eyes welled up, not with fear, but with a painful truth. Her father hadn't abandoned them. He had fought right to the end. Then came the line that chilled her. I've left a backup of the research and plant sample at the place where she used to take you for walks, somewhere I know they won't. Look, she knew exactly where that was. It was a quiet corner of the forest where her mother used to take her and Elijah every Sunday, a fern-covered knoll in the wetlands, where they'd sit and eat sandwiches. She hadn't been back since her mother died. Now it was her next destination. But she also knew if someone else had seen this journal before the box came back into her hands, they'd know that location too. The race for truth, or silence, had just begun. That afternoon, Aaliyah changed into plain clothes. She packed the sealed journal and tucked a small knife into her boot. She didn't notify her station or ask for backup, not out of distrust, but because this was no longer just a job. This was family. And if someone had made her father disappear, they would not want her returning to the place he had hidden the truth. The path to the old clearing was mostly overgrown. She had to park nearly a kilometer away and so hike in by memory, guided by feeling. The ferns were still there, thicker than before, blanketing the moist ground. She found the familiar rise in the earth, where her mother once laid out picnics, blankets. Kneeling, she brushed away damp leaves and loose soil. Within 2 minutes, her blade struck. Something solid, a tightly wrapped, moisture-resistant tarp. Inside was a small glass container holding a pressed plant specimen, its pale green-gray hue and serrated edges exactly matching the sketch in Elijah's notes. Alongside it, a stapled packet labeled Project Ficus B, Confidential, Draft V2.3. Her hands trembled as she opened. Inside were full scientific reports, biological tests, and applied research. Proposals showing the plant's ability to purify water, restore soil, and absorb CO2 at an exceptional rate. Then a sound. Aaliyah spun around. A middle-aged man stood about 20 meters away. Khakis, dark shirt, sunglasses. Calm. No expression. You must be Aaliyah Greene's daughter, he said quietly. She didn't reply, but her grip on the knife tightened. You should be careful with that. He nodded toward the container. It could cost people a lot, and no one wants that. Aaliyah rose slowly. Who are you? The man smiled faintly. I was a funder on that project. But when Greene refused to sign the Pautsat exclusivity agreement, things got complicated. He stepped forward. You should hand that over. Let the right people deal with it. She looked down at the glass container, then back at him. You've got two options, she said, steady as stone. 1. Turn around and I pretend I never saw you. 2. I radio HQ and report a federal interference at an active investigation. Sight. The man stared for a moment, then smirked. He turned and walked into the trees, disappearing into the undergrowth without a sound. Aaliyah stayed still until the forest was silent again. Only then did she breathe. Her hands were clenched tight around the research. She knew what she held wasn't just science. It was her father's last message. And no matter who tried to bury it, she was going to bring it into the light. 3 days after that strange encounter in the woods, Aaliyah returned to the police station, but her mind never strayed far from the notes and specimens now locked safely in her personal vault. She hadn't handed them over, not out of distrust, but because she needed to fully understand what she was holding and that the consequences it might carry. Aaliyah Greene had once tried to bring this data into the light. She wouldn't repeat his path without a plan. She decided to start in the safest place she says, New Southern Arkansas University, where her father once taught part-time before, dedicating himself entirely to the swamp research project. There, she sought out Professor Marcus Tillman, an elderly black botanist. She remembered visiting their home when she was a child. When he saw her, he exhaled, deeply moved. Aaliyah, Elijah's little girl. I never thought I'd hear that name again. When she laid out the pressed plant sample and her father's research notes, Marcus froze. His hands trembled as he flipped through each page, his eyes lingering on Elijah's handwriting. I thought this had been destroyed, he whispered. Someone once came asking about your father's work, but when I questioned their purpose, they said it was a threat to industrial ecological stability. Not long after, every file tied to Elijah vanished from the university library. I stayed quiet out of fear. Aaliyah nodded. I don't think you were the only one. She shared everything, finding the box, the journal entries, the man in the woods. When she finished, the room felt thick with silence. Marcus rose and opened an old steel cabinet. From inside, he pulled a slim folder. I kept a copy of Elijah's early lab data. I couldn't risk holding the originals, but I always felt one day someone would need it. 2 sets of documents, separated by 2 decades, now lay side by side. Missing pieces of a puzzle, finally together. Aaliyah could feel the storm closing in, and she wasn't wrong. The next day, she found her car had been searched. Nothing stolen, but the glove box had been rifled through and the dash cams unplugged. No note, no trace. Just enough to let her know they were watching. It wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was confirmation. She moved quickly. She encrypted her father's data and plant samples, backed them up, and sent copies to her mother's old attorney in Atlanta, the same one who'd handled Elijah's will. She knew now that survival in this game depended on controlled distribution. No one could erase a fire once it had been lit in multiple places. Then she returned to the old research cabin where Elijah had spent his last known days. This time she wasn't alone. She asked Malik, a longtime friend now, working in forestry maintenance, to come along under the pretense of surveying an abandoned site. Malik didn't know the full story, but he knew enough to understand the risk. The cabin was deep in restricted forest, 3 miles off the main trail, accessible only by off-road vehicle and foot. When they arrived, Aaliyah felt a chill. The door was busted open, hinges rusted and tossed aside. Inside, chaos. Torn papers, broken gear, and an emptied file cabinet. But one thing remained, a damaged VHS camera wedged beneath the desk. She retrieved it carefully. She didn't know if it would still hold data, but her instincts told her not to leave it behind. Back in town, she took it to a friend who ran an old photography shop. That night, when the grainy black and white footage flickered onto her computer screen, she held her breath. The footage was from inside the cabin. Elijah sat across from a man in a white lab coat, his face too blurry to make out. Can't sign, Elijah said. It's not. Who are you giving this to? The government? Private industry? Mining companies? The man replied, voice low and threatening. You're risking your family? Dr. Greene. The tape ended abruptly with a loud crash, as if the camera had been knocked over. Aaliyah sat in silence. The clip was short, but it confirmed what she had feared. Her father wasn't just followed, he was threatened, and he chose integrity over safety. She turned to Malik, who now understood the full gravity of the situation. He nodded. You can't keep this to yourself anymore. And she knew he was right. But releasing the truth would require precision, because the people watching her didn't act carelessly. They had waited 20 years, and now they knew she held everything. 2 days later, Aaliyah received an anonymous email. No subject, no message, just a link to a cloud folder. Using a secure VPN, she opened it and found scanned versions of her father's research. Notes, but edited. Sections had been redacted, replaced, rebranded under the name of a company she'd never seen before, Agrinova Solutions. A few deep searches later revealed the truth. Agrinova was a newly formed subsidiary of Gentera Bioresearch, the same company tied to her father's missing project 2 decades ago. It went deeper. Agrinova was preparing to launch a major government-backed initiative in the US Southwest, touting a biological soil filtration breakthrough to aid climate recovery. The terminology matched Elijah's findings. Exactly. But his name? Absent. No credit. No acknowledgement. She realized then this wasn't just about her father. It was about how independent blacks, scientists, especially those working outside traditional institutions, were systemically erased. Not violently, not dramatically, just quietly. And unless someone spoke up, it would happen. Again and again. Aaliyah decided it was time. She reached out to a veteran environmental investigative journalist who had been blacklisted for exposing a major pharmaceutical cover-up. They met in secret at a quiet cafe outside town. Aaliyah handed over everything, documents, the tape, the plant sample, and requested complete anonymity, at least at first. The journalist, Claudette, a middle-aged black woman with steady eyes, simply nodded. This isn't just about a forgotten scientist, she said. It's about a system that teaches truth to survive, underground. 1 week later, the first article dropped on a major independent news platform. Public attention followed. Photos of Elijah Greene, smiling with his plant samples in hand, began to circulate. For the first time in 20 years, his name returned to the scientific conversation, quietly but firmly. Agrinova. Gentera, the companies that once appeared untouchable, now face scrutiny over the true origin of their so-called innovation. Aaliyah didn't go on TV. She didn't grant interviews. But on her nightly patrols when she passed through the fog-kissed edge of that forbidden forest, she would pause for just a moment. Staring into the swaying trees, she'd whisper, I told your story, Daddy. It's no longer buried. Aaliyah thought things would quiet down after Claudette's articles went live. She was wrong. 2 weeks later, while preparing for her evening patrol, Aaliyah received a call from the department's internal affairs office. It was Deputy Chief Kendra Salazar. Her voice was calm, clipped. Aaliyah, we need you at the office. Now, it concerns your recent off-duty activity. Aaliyah had known this was coming, but not this soon. When she entered the conference room, Kendra was already seated, joined by a man in a gray shirt, no badge, no introduction. He simply said, we're conducting an inquiry into the unauthorized release of sensitive data related to a state-affiliated research initiative. His tone was flat, sterile, but his eyes scanned her like a dossier, more analysis than conversation. Kendra didn't look at her like she used to. No warmth, no empathy, just protocol. Aaliyah said nothing. No confirmation, no denial. By the end, the gray-suited man handed her a summons to appear before the state's security coordination board, not as an officer, but as a private citizen potentially involved in the unauthorized dissemination of restricted data. At home, she called Claudette. They're trying to flip the script, Claudette said. They can't deny the facts, so they'll question how you got them. They'll make it about ownership, about credibility. They'll use you to discredit your father. She was right. The battle was shifting from facts to character. The next day, a long anonymous post surfaced on a professional science forum titled Questionable Edits in the Aaliyah Greene Files, Fact or Family Fiction. It cited redacted segments and accused someone unnamed of altering documents for personal narrative, no names. But every comment section pointed at Aaliyah. Some defended her, others doubted. And then, that night, an envelope appeared. Beneath her apartment door, no return address. Inside was a photo of the research cabin, taken from a distance. Recently, while she and Malik were there, scribbled across the back, "This path may your father disappear. You sure you want to follow?" It wasn't veiled anymore. It was a threat. The next morning, Aaliyah arrived at the precinct under a cloud of suspicion. Every move now felt like walking on a frozen lake. Her colleagues' eyes, curious, cautious. She didn't blame them. In their world, one accusation of off-protocol behavior could turn a respected officer into a liability. On her desk sat another anonymous note printed from the department's internal network. Only one line. "Every ideal has a cost. Are you ready to pay yours?" She said nothing. Instead, she made a move few would dare. She requested a meeting with Julian Marks, the head of Genterra Bioresearch, listed in her father's old project files as the primary collaborator in 2001. Through Claudette's contacts, she secured a 30-minute appointment under the pretense of consulting on historical ecological projects. She didn't hide her name. Genterra's office was a monument of polished glass and corporate calm. Julian greeted her himself, silver hair, soft smile, eyes like glass. "You're Elijah's daughter," he said before she even sat. Admired him. "Brilliant, man. But brilliance often comes with stubbornness." Aaliyah didn't flinch. My father didn't refuse you because he was stubborn. He believed in ethical science." Julian shrugged. "And that's why he disappeared, isn't it?" It was said so casually, as if it were just fact. Aaliyah narrowed her eyes. "So you know what happened to him?" He didn't confirm. He didn't deny. Instead, he slid a folder across the table. "We once considered releasing the research under Elijah's name, but when he refused to transfer the rights, it stalled. You must understand, in science, discovery without distribution is dust." She rose. "And the cost was a life?" Julian smiled, an empty gesture signaling the end of a failed negotiation. "No one killed Elijah," he said. "He chose to disappear. That's what he wrote in the farewell letter. He left us. If you found the box, I assume you found the letter too." Aaliyah froze. Farewell letter? There was no such note in her father's journal. Just scattered entries. Fear. Fractured thoughts. Could Julian be lying, or had someone hidden the letter? Back home, she went over every scrap of the journal again. Every stain, every word. And then, on the last page, what she had once dismissed as water-damaged scribble, something caught her eye. She took the page to a university lab where a friend worked. Under UV light, faint words emerged. "If you've found this notebook, I had no choice. But the full truth isn't here. They may hold the rest, but don't let them silence my voice. Don't let them sever the connection." Connection. That word haunted her all night. Then she remembered her father's old field recorder. A small device he always wore clipped to his lab coat. It hadn't been in the box. She and Malik returned to the cabin, this time combing through everything left behind. And there, beneath the floorboards where the desk once stood, she found it, taped into a split in the wood. Rusted on one side, but the memory card intact. Back home, she played the final recording. Aaliyah Greene's voice, cracked but steady. "If anyone hears this, I'm sorry. I didn't want to leave. But they came. They said they'd hurt Aaliyah. She's just a child. They know her name, her school. I have no choice. I've stored the rest of the data at the bank. The code is her birthday. If you hear this, please forgive me. Aaliyah." collapsed, sobbing. He hadn't abandoned her. He had protected her. Every question, every doubt, every shadow she'd lived with for 20 years melted into one heartbreaking truth. Her father had kept his promise in silence, in fear, in sacrifice. And now it was her turn. She called Claudette. "We're not finished," she said. "There's one more piece. At the bank, the secure bank in downtown, Pine Bluff wasn't the kind of place one associated with national secrets or buried truths. But as Aaliyah stood at the deposit box counter, her heart pounded so hard she could swear the whole room could hear it. She gave the code, her own birth date, and the elderly manager unlocked the box without hesitation. Inside, a single USB drive wrapped in moisture-proof packaging and a handwritten letter. Aaliyah didn't open it there. She drove to an old patrol station on the forest's edge, an abandoned outpost where she used to sit during rookie shifts, writing up nightly reports. Quiet, unwatched, safe. She opened the letter first. It was her father's handwriting, but this time not rushed, not panicked. Calm, final. The voice of a man who knew this was his last chance to speak. Aaliyah Greene, writing this for the last time. My sweet girl, if you're reading this, you didn't just survive. You were strong enough to finish what I had to leave behind. Recounted the pressure, 3 attempts to force the transfer of his research. First came promises of funding, then legal threats, finally direct threats to his family. Then came the name that stopped Aaliyah cold, Marcus Tillman. She read it again. No mistake. Marcus, the trusted mentor, the family friend, the man who had helped her piece this puzzle together. He had been there. He was the one sent to deliver the final offer. In another line, Elijah wrote, "I don't believe Marcus betrayed me willingly. I think he was forced, but that doesn't make it hurt less. Trust, once broken, doesn't return." Aaliyah leaned against the wall, trembling. Everything in her collapsed. Marcus had been her anchor in this chaos. He hadn't directly harmed her father, maybe, but he had known, and he had chosen silence. She didn't confront him that day. She needed a night, not from fear, but from discipline. She understood the most important conversations aren't won by fury, but by clarity. The next morning, she went to the biology department where Marcus still worked, part-time. He was reading, bathed in morning light, looking like a man with nothing left to hide. When he saw her, he smiled, as if everything was normal. Aaliyah sat down and placed the letter on the table, no words. Marcus stared at the page. Slowly, silently, he read. His reaction was not surprise, just a long, exhausted sigh. "You should..." "No, Elijah wasn't the first," he began, "and he wasn't the last." He spoke like someone worn thin by years of guilt. He hadn't supported the push to force Elijah's signature, but he also hadn't stopped. "They didn't threaten me," he whispered. "They threatened my son. He was 6. I stayed quiet because I was a father. Just like Elijah." Aaliyah didn't know what to feel: anger, pity, grief. Instead, she felt empty. "I was wrong," Marcus said, "and I don't expect forgiveness. But if you need more proof to clear your father's name, I have it." He opened a drawer and handed her a weathered envelope. Internal. Letters between Gen Terra and its partners. Documents showing they had long planned to use Elijah's plant for a proprietary chemical. Fertilizer, ignoring every warning he'd written about ecological risks. "You kept these for 20 years and said nothing?" she swayed, asked, voice brittle. Marcus nodded. "I waited for someone brave. Enough that someone is here now." She didn't reply. She took the envelope and walked out without looking back. She didn't know if forgiveness was possible. Maybe not. But she needed this closure, not for reconciliation, but to end a 20-year silence. That night, Aaliyah sent the new files to Claudette. The next wave of articles hit harder than before, not just the forgotten story of one scientist, but the revelation of a system designed to suppress knowledge and intimidate dissent. The public response was fierce, louder than Aaliyah had expected. Young researchers began sharing their own stories of buried projects, stolen work, and institutional silence. And maybe, in the scope of hidden echoes, this was the most valuable moment of all. When one person's pain stopped being a private burden and became the seed of collective reckoning. When a disappearance didn't end a life, it lit a fuse. 1 month after Claudette's final article went live, the forest where Aaliyah Greene once worked bore a new sign, Green Hollow, ecological preserve. It wasn't a state initiative. It was a community-led effort. Students, journalists, and Pine Bluff residents came together, raised the funds, and made it happen. At the dedication ceremony, Aaliyah stood quietly among the crowd. No uniform, no speech, just watching, listening. A young student stepped forward and said, "We study plant genetics, but we were never taught that someone like Dr. Greene once led this kind of research. They don't teach that in class." That line stayed with Aaliyah. She no longer patrols the night roads of Pine Bluff. After everything settled, she requested a transfer, now working as a community liaison, building bridges between the police, department, and local education programs. No one forced her. It was her choice. Not stepping away, just changing how she serves. Because Aaliyah knows now, sometimes protecting the truth doesn't require a badge. Sometimes it just means keeping a name where it belongs, on the map. That evening, she returned to the cabin, alone. Not to search, not to record, just to leave behind a small wooden plaque. She had carved herself. "I found my father, not by his remains, but by the truth." She placed it beneath the old tree, the very spot where the metal box had once been buried. The forest wind swept through her hair, rustling the leaves like whispers from memory. From the perspective of fog stories, perhaps, nothing is more powerful than a truth that endures, even if it arrives late, even if no one apologizes. Aaliyah Greene is gone, but his name, and the silence he was forced to choose, has finally been translated. And his daughter, by telling his story, has broken a chain of silence carried across generations. We can't rewrite the past, but we can stop covering it up. This story doesn't end with indictments. There's no sentence, no click of handcuffs, but it leaves behind something more important, a memory returned to its rightful place, a life no longer left in the margins of history. Aaliyah left the cabin as night fell. The Arkansas sky cast long shadows over the old trees. Moonlight slipped through the canopy and lit the narrow trail ahead. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. From this moment on, she wasn't just a seeker of truth. She was its keeper. What do you think really happened to Dr. Aaliyah Greene? Did he disappear out of fear or love? Have all the secrets come to light? Or are some still waiting to be found? We may never have all the answers. But here's what we do believe. Truth, even when it comes late, is always worth telling. If you've ever lost someone, not to death, but to years of silence, know that you are not alone. Some memories are buried not because we want to forget, but because we don't know where to begin. This is Hidden Echoes, where we tell the stories without clean endings. Because sometimes the ache is what keeps us searching, and sometimes just telling it once is enough to break a silence that lasted too long.